Hello Internet and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. My name is Wyatt and today I'm going to share with you a cool tool I recently added to my GM repertoire that I call Extra Credit that sort of bribes players to buy into a campaign and setting. I'm going to start by talking about what I was trying to solve for when I thought of this little hack on the long-standing tradition of bribing players to engage with your setting. I think this is useful context, but if you just want to get right to the heart of the matter, jump to the chapter called Extra Credit. So I've typically always run long-form, sort of sandbox-adjacent campaigns where my players have a lot of agency and I don't stress too much about pacing or milestones. I let them happen organically by my players' choices, and that's usually worked pretty well for me so far. One place it doesn't work is for playtests, which occur with some regularity. At the time of this video, we're coming off a Starfinder class playtest, and it was our second playtest of the year, so they happen with regularity. And if you know our channel, then you know that I love this process. But the time limits of playtest feedback windows and the desire to test classes at different levels and scenarios means that I have to be much more conscious of pacing, and because I also want to test certain types of encounters, it means that a lot more railroading has to happen than either my or my players are used to. Now, for a while, I would stick to variations on sort of an arena approach or similar scenarios that required minimal setup and story for my players to worry about, so we could just sort of get in and test what we were trying to test. Very sort of a cold mechanical approach to it that, worked at the time. But then the play test for the kineticist came along, and it had me very concerned about skills in and out of combat for that class because it was a con key ability score, which meant that its key ability governed no skills, which meant that overall it was going to be pretty low in terms of its ability to interact with things outside of its core class mechanics. Whole talk about that on a different video if you want to go back and read it or listen to it, but suffice it to say, it made me rethink how I was approaching my playtests. In short, I had to start making actual adventures. But I found that my players still didn't really treat the playtests like adventures. And that was fine when it was just arena fights, but once, we're working in exploration and social checks, roleplay opportunities start to present themselves, and I wanted to find a way to encourage that. Make my characters a little more invested in what they were doing with the new classes and with the new scenarios and things that we were testing, rather than just sort of going through the motions with it. And so, extra credits. It's more than just a bribe, I promise. So I sort of came up with this idea for the last playtest. I'm calling it extra credits. In short, I offered my players additional starting wealth for answering a series of questions about their characters. In the case of our very cyberpunk-inspired tech class playtest that I was just talking about, I asked them the following 3 questions. 1, how or why did you join the criminal organization in the first place? 2, what reason is your character earnestly loyal to this crime boss NPC? And 3, what did you do before you joined this gang? They were given no restrictions on these beyond, minor tweaks to make them make sense with other things. And to be honest with you, I didn't have a lot of intention to use these for the playtest. It's very short, and I'm just not typically going to get super involved in anybody's backstory. These were questions I was asking not really for me, except one of them, which we will get to in a moment, but mostly for my players to get them invested in the character, and because they were so open-ended, I gave them free rein to help create aspects of the setting and the game world, which made them instantly a little more bought in. And for each question that they answered, they got a few extra credits of starting wealth to buy gear and upgrades. There was also an additional bonus for the total number of people who answered at least one question, because you didn't have to answer them all. I really wanted that middle one, but now obviously GMs have been incentivizing players to engage since before I was born, but there are a couple of twists on here that I think are worth noting. In the first place, the starting wealth that I began them with was slightly higher than the baseline. Pathfinder 2e has a starting wealth that feels kind of pretty minimal. It's not necessarily what they're expected to have, it's more like the bare minimum that you should start them with. So I offered a higher baseline just to help people cover their basics, because I didn't want this to feel like a requirement, something that they needed to do to function. Second, and most important, these credits were a universal bonus for everyone. What that means is players who didn't have time, creativity, or just the mental bandwidth to answer these questions would also get the same amount of coin as the people that did. This way, no one is punished, and everyone reaps benefits from any extra work done by anyone, meaning it's all carrot, no stick. Something that, in general, I think is a good way to run a game. Obviously, repercussions happen, but, In the end, they were able to go from 5,000 starting credits to, I think, 7,500 credits each. For people wondering how that converts, Starfinder credits are one Pathfinder silver piece, so that's from 500 gold to 750. What this meant was no pressure on people, and the people who liked doing this stuff and were probably going to do it already don't just get a reward that tilted people's starting power. They get celebrated by their teammates who appreciate being able to upgrade their backup weapon or being able to bring some extra consumables or grab that fun jetpack or vision upgrade. But the magic thing that happened is that I had my players invested not only in this fleeting one-off story setup, but they were also eagerly awaiting hearing each other's backstories, because that meant more starting credits to upgrade their cybernetic augments or pick up a few new grenades. Now, I'm pretty lucky in that my players are above average on engagement in my current groups. I've had different groups that care about different things more or less, but these ones I'm very lucky. I've never really seen people, however, gassing each other up for answering a few backstories like this, especially for a playtest. And I can't recall a time as a GM when I've been so effortlessly successful at getting my players to like an NPC right out of the gate. So how do you fit it into your game? Well, as always, your mileage will vary based on your party, your GM style, and your campaign or game system. Certain campaigns, you might want your players to start with minimal wealth, and some systems eschew economies altogether. In these cases, you might look for alternative rewards to make it fit your game, like positive reputation with different factions, or if your party is starting in a prison or similarly without resources, maybe they hear about a cache of coin or supplies that another prisoner left behind, Count of Monte Cristo style. So you can still start them low on resources that way, but once they do escape and actually get to the campaign proper, they get a leg up on building their new lives. And don't worry about balancing your party, or unbalancing them rather, by giving them too much loot. Pathfinder 2e provides that handy chart. As long as you don't double that number, it should be fine. I went for about 1.5 times the starting wealth, which is perfectly reasonable because, again, it is sort of a minimal gold expectation. And, it's perfectly reasonable within the ballpark. It also helps that Pathfinder 2e's economy works so well, and most importantly probably, that its items have recommended levels. So your players don't use that extra coin to buy over-leveled items. You can just say, hey, anything up to your level you can buy. If it's over your level, you can't have it. You'll also, of course, want to vary those questions by your campaign. If your players aren't hanging out with mob bosses or joining gangs, then my questions that I gave in as an example aren't going to be useful to you. But really just use your best judgment, figure out what sort of things you want your players to care about, and build your questions around that. If you're asking questions about things that you don't actually want to be the focus of the campaign or care about, that's probably wasting everyone's time. I'd also recommend only a few questions. Huge, in-depth character questionnaires look cool on Tumblr, but in reality, they're just daunting for players and GMs alike, typically. I've known a few players to write really in-depth backstories. I've done it. But handing out questionnaires that are assigned for people to do, and that sets an expectation that you're going to get to all those things you ask them about. Like I said, if it's something you don't care about, you don't want to ask questions about it. And, especially if it's a shorter campaign, just a few handful of questions to help you guide both your players and your own ideas of what's going to be going on is best. I also recommend you leave them open enough for your players to be creative and try to say yes to whatever they try to do. But don't be afraid to stand firm on important points. I mentioned earlier that there was one that I was pretty rigid and specific that I needed, and that was specifically that loyalty to that NPC. But see, because to keep my tighter structure, I needed my players to be loyal to that mob boss, and while I allowed the degree of loyalty to vary, and might even have caved for a really interesting idea, I did not treat that one as optional, and I was very firm on the parameters. And that because with playtests, we tend to do level jumps, to accommodate for testing at different levels. And that allowed me to have a built-in plot hook when it came time to do a time jump, to do the level jump. And I, was able to say, hey, these are a couple of things, depending on the choice you made with that dilemma I posed at the end of the last session. These are the way it's going to affect not just you, but also this NPC that you like. So by doing that, it made them care more about that choice and be a little more invested in that choice. Very much like a choose your own adventure book, which I'm beginning to find is a really nice approach to these play tests to keep structure, but also keep story and still allow your players some creative freedom and some choice in how things progress. Just doing it all between sessions instead of having to improvise in session. In closing, I will definitely be using this in probably all my campaigns going forward, including longer form campaigns. I also plan to do a little bit of iterating on some of these ideas. For example, the PaizoCon preview of Battlecry suggested that we will see player-controlled troops that can have a few different bonuses based on drills that you run at prep time with your troop. And I wonder if upgrading those troops slightly and tying that to the questions could be an interesting incentive. Or maybe all of that extra coin goes into a separate loot pool that's shared and goes towards upgrading a shared thing like a base of operations or a ship or something like that. So my question to you is, have you ever done something like this? How do you incentivize your players? Do you use these sort of bribery type methods? Do you have any twists or anything on the idea that you've used before? Because like I said, it's not a super original idea. I just think some of these little twists make it a little more interesting. But so have you done any of your own twists on these sort of bribery ideas? Leave a comment below or come over to our Discord and discuss. Do you like this idea? Do you hate it? Do you plan to try it in your game? Or do you just want to encourage these types of videos on the channel? If so, like, subscribe, comment, or share this video with your friends. It all adds up and it really does help out the channel, and we really appreciate it so much, every little bit. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Happy Pride Month. Bye, everybody.